Between 1933 and 1945, 5.5 million minimum to 7 million maximum Jews were murdered by the Germans and their collaborators. When the war ended, when the Holocaust ended, not the same, two different events, the number of survivors was about 250,000, more or less. We will never know the exact number of the Jews who were murdered by the Germans and their collaborators, and we will never know the exact, accurate number of survivors. However, the first survivors of the Holocaust reached the shores of the land of Israel even before the Holocaust ended. Exchange of prisoners, exchange of soldiers. So already in 1944, Jews who were victims of the Holocaust but were luckily not murdered reached the shores of the land of Israel. The British authorities were of course not very happy and tried to arrest them. Many Holocaust survivors found their way not to the promised land but to Cyprus, where they were again prisoners behind barbed wire. At least nobody killed them, nobody murdered them, nobody tortured them, nobody humiliated them, but they were prisoners and they could reach the shores of the promised land only on May 14, 1948, the day Israel was born. So we see the so-called illegal ships with thousands of illegal, of course in quotes, survivors of the Holocaust trying desperately to reach their old historical land, but the British Mandate government was not so happy and did all it could to prevent the arrival of the survivors of the Holocaust. When I mentioned that the first survivors reached the land of Israel before the end of the Holocaust, it means that the Yishuv, the Jewish population, a very small one by the way, about 450,000 Jews, or 500,000 living here, realized what happened in the Holocaust already before the Holocaust ended. So in 1944, you could read about the Holocaust in the press, in the free press of the land of Israel, in Hebrew, Jerusalem Post, and other newspapers. So from 1946 to 1948, about 2 years, again, Holocaust survivors have to be prisoners. Of course, the conditions were totally different. However, they were not free people. But they didn't lose their hope to see one day the land of Israel, and luckily they realized their dream just 2 years later. The camps were not a luxury place, but somehow they survived. Most of the Holocaust survivors who were imprisoned in Cyprus survived the 2 years. You can see the living conditions, but there was a cultural sport activities. There were messengers from the land of Israel. The Haganah sent some messengers. So there were ties between the land of Israel and Cyprus. But still, they were not free people. Even Golda Meir came one day for a visit. Israeli politicians came to visit and were accepted with big honor, as we can see. Some even didn't live in barracks, but in tents. And our national singer, Shoshana Damari, once gave a concert there. So there was a rich cultural life for the Holocaust survivors who wanted only one thing, to reach one goal, to see their own historical homeland. Even paramilitary exercises were conducted in Cyprus. And then the war begins and the first Holocaust survivors reach the land of Israel. A tragedy within the tragedy was the fact that among the 6,205 Israeli soldiers which fell for their country during the first war, out of 14 we had until now, the War of Independence, about half of them, 47%, were Holocaust survivors. And they were the last remnants of their families. So when they were gone, the family disappeared, just disappeared, was wiped out from this land. At least they gave their life for their own historical homeland. So 47% of the 6,000 Israeli soldiers who died during the War of Independence were Holocaust survivors. They didn't speak Hebrew yet.
they had no military experience, and they had to go ahead to the front without being prepared for such a big mission. The first 15 years, from 1948 to 1961, are considered the years of silence, during which the Holocaust survivors do not tell their stories because there were no ears to listen to the stories. The Israeli society is busy, very busy. There is war, there is an economical crisis called the Tzena, there is nothing to eat in the state of Israel, and they learn that being quiet is now better than try to tell and talk. But it would be inaccurate to describe the years from 1948 to 61 as complete or total years of silence, because 1953 Yad Vashem is established due to the efforts of Holocaust survivors who are now also parliament members, the Knesset. About 50% of members of the Knesset are Holocaust survivors. By the way, in brackets, amazingly, they don't share the same political opinion. We find, for instance, Menachem Begin at the right wing, at the Likud, later our prime minister, and on the left side, Chaika Grossman, one of the leaders of the partisans of the Bialystok ghetto, who is totally left, Mapam. There can be no big difference than Begin and Chaika Grossman, and they had shared the same experience. So being a Holocaust survivor does not say that you share the same political opinion. So we see a typical ceremony at Yad Vashem, 1959, but if you happen to visit Yad Vashem nowadays, it was a different Yad Vashem. In 1959, the year we see here, this is the yearly Yom HaShoah ceremony, the yearly number of visitors was not more than 12,000 per year. Nowadays, almost 2 million visitors, so a little difference. Yad Vashem was not important, and the Holocaust was not a topic which people talk about. Parallel to what I'm trying to explain to you, secretly in Luxembourg, 2 delegations meet for negotiations, an Israeli delegation and a German one. The subject is one: getting back the robbed property of the Jewish people, which was robbed from 1933 onwards, and now the state of Israel, so poor that it has no choice but to talk with the representatives of the murderers. At the head of Israeli delegation is the man standing the right. His name in Germany was Georg Joseftal. In Israel, he was a cabinet minister, Giora Joseftal. Nowadays, many streets bear his name, but I'm doubtful if the people who live in that street know who this person was. And Mr. Shinar, second from the left. Secret negotiations, and one of the main speakers for the Jewish people, and not only for the state of Israel, was Dr. Nahum Goldman, who was at that time the president of the World Jewish Congress. And to show you how important the negotiations with the country of the murderers was, we see who comes later to sign the agreement called Hashilumim in Hebrew, Wiedergutmachung in German. It is the prime minister of, at that time, Israeli foreign minister. A few months later, Israeli prime minister Moshe Sharet, first person to the right. Here he is, Moshe Sharet, and Mr. Goldman. Here they deal with the German delegation about getting at least some percentage of the huge quantity of property and money stolen, robbed from the Jewish people from 33 to 45. Here is Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Goldman, Mr. Joseftal, and who heads the German delegation, of course, Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, to show you how important the negotiations were for both countries. But at that time, until the minute of signing, nobody in Israel and nobody in Bundesrepublik Deutschland knew about this. It had to be kept in silence because both governments knew for sure that there will be some people who will not be so pleased to hear about the negotiations. And in Israel, the person who stood in front of the opposition to this agreement was this person who later, 1977, will become Israel's Prime Minister, Menachem Begin. And here, a huge demonstration in Tel Aviv, about 500,000 people, which for Israel at that time is huge. Here he stands, you can see him, small. People who are not in favor of this agreement. I can summarize that 50% of the Israelis were for and the other 50 against, because it was such a sensitive topic just a few years after the end of the Holocaust. We see here again a demonstration in Tel Aviv. I will translate in Hebrew. כבודנו לא יימכר בכסף, דמנו לא יכופר בסחורות, נמחה את החרפה. In other words, our honor cannot be sold for money, our blood cannot be pardoned by German merchandise, and the most important thing below, we will wipe out this shameful agreement. We will wipe out this shameful agreement. But democracy is democracy, and here, not far from the place we are gathered today at the parliament, the Israeli government and Knesset decide, yes, we will take the money from Bundesrepublik Deutschland, because otherwise the land of the survivors will collapse. And it was not far from this, believe me. 5 minutes before collapse, they say, yes, we see in the first row Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, 52, she's still Minister for Work, Golda Meir, Meirson, and Mr. Begin speaking here, left side hand. So, according to the vote, yes, we will take the money. Years later, much later, when Begin was Prime Minister, Der Spiegel came out with this title, Sind wir alle Nazis? Are we all Nazis? Because Begin did not leave for a second his anti-German attitude until his death. So he was less pragmatic than other prime ministers and did not change his mind until his last minute. You remember, questions during the lecture, not later. A very dramatic event, I doubt if somebody here heard about it, which was a stormy event in the history of Israel and is still and has still very deep influence about our society, inside our society, was the Kastner affair of 1954 to 1957. But I can say that the Kastner affair is still with us. Rudolf Israel Kastner was a Zionist leader in Hungary, and in order to save Hungarian Jews, 1944, you remember the German invasion, 19th of March, 44, he thought he had to negotiate with Adolf Eichmann and his team, which he did. He saved Jews. He saved at least 1,652 Jews and brought them later to Switzerland. And then in 1949, he emigrated to the land of Israel. Because of an unimportant publication in an unimportant newspaper accusing him in betrayal or collaboration with the Nazis, a trial starts in Jerusalem in 1955. And during this trial, Kastner, who is the accuser, is torn by the lawyer of the accused, Mr. Greenwald, and he has to defend his activities during the Holocaust. Few months after the start of the trial, 3 people come to the door of his apartment in Tel Aviv and shoot him. After a few weeks, he dies. So he is the 6,000,001 victim of the Holocaust. And only 1 year later, the accusations were cancelled by the High District Court. This was too late for him, and he didn't see the day where he was acclaimed not accused. Another affair which shows the big influence of the Holocaust survivors and the atmosphere of danger that the Jews living here, including the Holocaust survivors, takes place in the 60s. In 1962, the Israeli government gets an information that pre-Nazi scientists, rocket scientists, V2, V5, plan to build for Egypt, our neighbor from south, a rocket industry which wants to destroy the state of Israel, the state of the survivors. In order to prevent this danger, which was very big, the government of Israel and the Mossad, our secret service, recruits the best spy we could, a former German Jew, Wolfgang Lotz. I'm sorry, it's a mistake. His name was Lotz, L-O-T-Z, in Israel, Zev Gurarie, and he sent to Egypt to do anything, by all means, that Egypt will not be able to endanger the Jewish state again, just 10 years after the Holocaust. The survivors of the Holocaust in the parliament and outside pushed the government of Israel and the Mossad to do any effort to prevent the danger, which is a real one. Wolfgang Lotz succeeded fantastically. They left one after the other, but you know, even James Bond does some mistakes, and he is arrested. Wolfgang Lotz was arrested with his helper, which later was his wife. He was sitting for 12 years in Egyptian prison, but the danger has gone. This was 100% success. 1961 is a turning point in the attitude of Israeli society towards the Holocaust survivors and towards the Holocaust in general. Why? Because on the stage of Beit Ha'am, about 1 mile from here, 1 kilometer from here, for the first time in the history of the State of Israel, 108 people, Jews who survived the Holocaust, tell about their own experience. Until that time, the description on the Holocaust was something very general, very theoretical. Now, for the first time, the Israelis hear the Holocaust told on a personal basis. I was there, I suffered, I was humiliated, my family was murdered. It's a dramatic change in the atmosphere. Every Israeli listens to the broadcasts from Beit Ha'am, and from that time we count a drastic change in the attitude and in the awareness of Israeli society towards the Holocaust as a topic and towards Holocaust survivors. So 1961 is the first turning point, a big turning point. There will be more which I will mention later. We see here the man who was called the architect of the final solution. By the way, in this case, not the Mossad was responsible for the initiative, but for private people, which were Manus Diamant, Shimon Wiesenthal, Fritz Bauer, and most importantly, Lothar Hermann. So 4 private people, or at least acting like private people. Some photos from the Eichmann trial, 1961. In 1962, Eichmann was sentenced to death. He was hanged at the Ramla prison and his ashes thrown into the Mediterranean. The most dramatic part or point or minute of the trial was the shortest one. It lasted not more than 2 minutes, 120 seconds. It was the appearance of an Auschwitz survivor. His real name was Yechiel Dinur, more known or better known as Katzetnik. He wrote the most important books on Auschwitz. There are translations I recommend to you. If you really want to feel the atmosphere of Auschwitz, read his books. He was the first and I think the best and the most authentic author on Auschwitz because he was there, he survived Auschwitz. And when the judge asked him, please tell us what you remember, the burden of Auschwitz was too heavy and he collapsed after 2 minutes, even less, I think it was a little less than 2 minutes. He couldn't speak and never came again to Beit Ha'am to continue his very, very short testimony. But if you ask people who were adults at that time, what do they remember from the Auschwitz, from the Eichmann trial? This is what they would remember. Katzetnik. Katzetnik, of course, comes from the word katzet, camp, lager, but his real name was Yechiel Dinur, born in a small Polish town not far from Auschwitz, where many Jews, many thousands of Jews lived before the Holocaust. Next step in the awareness of the Holocaust survivors and the state of the survivors, the state of Israel, comes on August 19th, 1965. Look thoroughly at that photo. Such ceremonies under different conditions in the whole world never look like this. It looks like a burial ceremony, isn't it? But it isn't. Usually, it's a ceremony in which you drink champagne, you smile, you're very happy, diplomatic relations. It looks like a funeral. It was for many Israelis, especially Holocaust survivors. The first ambassador of Bundesrepublik Deutschland, Mr. Rolf Pauls, credentials to the President of the State of Israel, Zalman Shazar, in the center. To his right, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Golda Meir. And look, nobody's smiling. They are very, very serious because it is a very sensitive subject. Here he comes to the ceremony. But if we will not mention something which happened a few years before it, we will not understand how this was possible. And this was possible only because two old men met in Waldorf Astoria, New York, 5 years earlier, Konrad Adenauer and David Ben-Gurion. I will show you a series of pictures to show you what kind of chemistry the two old people had. And you will be surprised to see it. It seems that they are alone. Of course, such people are never alone. There are secretaries and people of the delegation. But it's 1960. Few years after the Holocaust, look what a friendly atmosphere. Surprising, really surprising. Soon they will dance a tango. It's 1960, Waldorf Astoria, New York. A big friendship which will never stop until the death of both politicians. And only because of this event, the way was paved for the diplomatic relations in 1965, an event which not all Israelis were so happy to accept. So without mentioning this, here you see one of the helpers, and so this paved the way. And when Adenauer later, after stopping being the chancellor, came to Israel, Ben-Gurion still, who himself was not anymore the prime minister of Israel, came to Ben-Gurion airport to welcome him here again, a visit. He's a little older, you can see it, Moshe Dayan in the background, so the friendship remained. Adenauer even visited Ben-Gurion in his kibbutz, the Boker, and look how funny members of the kibbutz ask, who is that funny person with the tie? This is not what we are used in our kibbutz. The last visit was on May 66. He got some honor. And when Adenauer dies in 1967, who represents the State of Israel? Ben-Gurion. Our first ambassador, who himself was half survivor, was Asher or Arthur Ben-Natan. He did a marvelous job, really a marvelous job. What a difference, what a change he did in his life. From 1945 to 1948, Mr. Ben-Natan stood at the head of Hanukmim, the avengers, the people who took revenge against German and Austrian murderers in the forests of Europe, killing about 243 German and Austrian murderers. Now he is the first ambassador of the State of Israel. What a change. From that moment on, the relations between the land of the survivors and Germany changed dramatically. We have a lot of visitors. The President of Germany, Mutti, and so on.
이스라엘 선교 전문 방송 브레드 TV. 이스라엘을 위해 기도하고 싶으신데 기도 제목을 잘 모르시겠다고요? 그럴 땐 이스라엘 전문 방송 브레드 TV로 들어오시면 됩니다. 언제 어디서나 시청 가능한 브레드 TV. 매번 주소 검색하시느라 힘드셨죠? 브레드 TV 바로가기 아이콘을 만들면 한 한 번에 들어가 원하시는 방송을 시청하실 수 있습니다. 브레드 TV 바로가기 아이콘 만들기. 삼성, LG 등 안드로이드 버전입니다. 먼저 인터넷 버튼을 눌러주세요. 그리고 breadtv.co.kr을 입력. 브레드TV 홈페이지로 이동합니다. 홈페이지로 이동한 후 핸드폰 하단의 메뉴 버튼을 눌러주세요. 여기서 홈 화면에 바로가기 추가. 이 버튼만 누르면 끝이에요. 이제 바탕화면에 생긴 브레드TV 아이콘을 누르시면 한 번에 원하시는 방송을 선택 신청하실 수 있습니다. 다음은 아이폰에서 바로가기 아이콘 만드는 방법입니다. 인터넷 버튼을 누르세요. 그리고 breadtv.co.kr을 입력. 브레드TV 홈페이지로 이동합니다. 이동 후 화면을 움직이면 핸드폰 하단에 메뉴바가 나옵니다. 여기서 가운데 버튼을 클릭하고 바로 보이는 홈 화면에 추가를 눌러주세요. 그리고 추가 버튼만 누르면 끝입니다. 마지막으로 아이패드에서 바로가기 아이콘을 만드는 방법입니다. 역시 인터넷 버튼을 눌러주세요. 그리고 breadtv.co.kr을 입력. 홈페이지로 이동하면 주소창 옆에 화살표를 클릭. 홈 화면에 추가 버튼을 누르고 추가를 누르면 끝이에요. 이제 바탕화면에 생긴 브레드TV 아이콘을 누르시면 한 번에 원하시는 방송을 선택 신청하실 수 있습니다.